So I don't know about you, but when someone describes me, I don't want them to have to do a whole bunch of mental gymnastics to try to explain away my behavior with something like, oh, well, she means well, or her heart is in the right place, or if you're Southern, bless her heart, she's just frustrated and having a hard time right now. Now, to be clear, we all need that level of grace sometimes. But if people have to filter everything I say on a regular basis, that means people are having to do a lot of work to see through my delivery and give me the benefit of the doubt. And A, not everyone is going to do that. And B, it's straining the relationships with the people I have who are willing to do that. And whether I like it or not, that's on me. That means if I actually care about how I'm perceived, then I have some work to do. So if you see yourself in that struggle, then keep listening, because that's what we're going to tackle today. Hello, and welcome to Powered by Purpose. I'm Melody Lacey, and in the past, when I was functioning primarily in survival mode, a lot of people in my life had to look past my behavior to see my intentions. And not everyone cared enough to do that. I mean, it's actually a lot to ask of people. And so there came a point where I had to face the disconnect between what was in my heart and what people were experiencing with me on a regular basis. And so I put the work in, and now I help people heal that disconnect for themselves by showing you how to clear the distorted perceptions that keep us from being able to see and treat ourselves and others the way God asks us to. Because the reality is, who you're showing up as on a regular basis eventually becomes who you are, regardless of how disconnected it might be from your intentions. And while that might be a little bit of a hard pill to swallow, you're in good company. We've all struggled to some degree with underlying tension in our life that disconnects us from how God has called us to relate to one another. So, we're going to take a God and others approach to self discovery and personal growth and unpack the real root cause behind the friction so we can get out of survival mode and start letting the intention in our hearts shine through in our actual behavior instead of contradicting ourselves and constantly having to ask for forgiveness, which, let's be honest, that's what we all need when we're being jerks, right? Regardless of the reason. And as you'll see, this journey requires some humility because if you embark on it, you'll have to truthfully examine what's really driving your behavior. But worry not. I'm here to show you what worked for me so that you don't have to just think real hard about it and not get anywhere. There's an actual process for examining evidence, actual evidence to discover how your beliefs are shaping your perception of reality and thus how we see ourselves. And once you understand yourself more clearly, then you'll be able to understand others much better as well. And that's the first step in reducing our stress and getting out of chronic survival mode. And it isn't just stop worrying. Yes, God told us not to worry, but this isn't about a lack of faith or being a bad Christian. God knew we would struggle with stress, which is why He also instructs us to renew our thinking with His truth. And the reality is, renewing our minds requires more than just good intentions. And thankfully, God has designed our brains to be able to bridge the gap between the two. And so let me say this right out of the gate. Survival mode isn't a sin. However, if you lash out at others because you're always tapped out, then yeah, those behaviors typically end up falling into the sin category, which is why this is worth paying attention to. Among other reasons, like how chronic stress negatively affects our health span, which, unless you're living under a rock, you already know about. But that's downstream of what we're going to tackle today. But good news, if you follow this approach, you will absolutely reduce your stress and have an incredible impact on your overall health and those cortisol levels you're trying to lower. We all are. And it's also important to understand that survival mode exists for a reason, but it's intended to be a temporary mode, not a new operating model. You see, we have these powerful primal brains that put us into fight, flight, fawn, or faint, and that's to survive a threat to our lives. However, as amazing as our brains are, they're also kind of stupid. I mean, primal, like caveman primal, because they have a really hard time distinguishing between the imminent danger of being chased by a bear and the perceived threats that we imagine or exaggerate in our minds. You see, all stress, and I'm not being dramatic here, literally all stress comes from the perceived threat of either losing something you desire or gaining something you'd like to avoid. So let me say that again, because it blew my mind when I first heard it too. It just seems far too simple. But this is where it all stems from: fear. Fear from the perceived threat of either losing something you desire or gaining something you'd like to avoid. So, when you're in survival mode, you're in a state of chronic protection because you're afraid that at any given moment, the floor is going to drop out from under you, and one of those two things is going to happen. And when your brain is stuck in that cycle, no amount of box breathing is going to help. Because while that's a fantastic way to calm your nervous system when you're experiencing stress in the moment, it isn't how you get to the root of what's causing it in the first place. Because constantly having to manage the symptoms of stress is just exhausting, even though the irony is that they're meant to be relaxing. And we want to get into a state where we're so balanced that we can handle stress in a healthy way when it happens, and then go back into a balanced state because the stress event ends. It hasn't become a perpetual new normal. That's what we're going for here. And so, if you've either read my articles or listened to any of my previous podcast episodes, you know that the work I do with clients is all about perception and how our perception of ourselves gets projected onto others. And I'm constantly driving the point home that we can't control anything other than ourselves, which means we can't technically control how other people perceive us. However, and this is a big however, while that's absolutely true, we absolutely can control how we behave and treat others, which puts the responsibility squarely back on us to at least conduct ourselves in a way we can at least feel good about. And then, and really only then, can we truly let the chips fall as they may when it comes to other people's interpretation of us, which of course is based on their perception, which is based on how they see themselves, and they project onto us as well. And round we go. Hopefully you can see the cycle here. So as we work on our own perception, we owe it to ourselves and everyone around us to also focus on how it plays out in our behavior. You know, things like, I know my mom loves me. She's just having another hard day. Or, I'm sure dad didn't mean it that way. He's just frustrated with work right now. And I guess all the time. Or, she didn't mean that, did she? At least I don't think she did. Or maybe she does. Maybe that is what she means. She seems to say it all the time. Or maybe, like my real world example, where a colleague walked out of a meeting one day and asked my boss who pissed in her Cheerios. I'll never forget that. And I could not deny that I totally earned that. My behavior earned that assessment. So, clearly my stress responses lead toward anger, right, in those examples. But maybe your unregulated response isn't lashing out. Maybe it's withdrawing. And now you're basically unapproachable or a ticking time bomb because you can't handle daily life anymore because you're so tapped out because everything feels like a crisis. Regardless of your flavor of reaction, too much time in this unregulated state sucks the life out of you and everyone around you. And if you want to feel better about yourself and show up differently for others and the relationships you care about, then it's time to dig a little deeper into why you're perceiving situations as a threat of gain or loss in the first place, and what's driving your interpretation, and thus your response to it, so you can truly get yourself back into a regulated state where you're intentionally responding to situations versus emotionally reacting. All right, so when you're in an unregulated state from chronic stress, it's because you've been functioning for far too long outside your highest personal priorities. And now you're feeling totally disconnected from yourself and you're basically mad about it. But you just don't realize that's what's going on. So you're judging yourself and everyone else by subconscious standards that you're trying to live up to overcompensate for your discontentment. And that friction right there is what's causing you to run patterns of defensiveness, control mechanisms, people pleasing, you name it, to try to overcompensate for the disconnect. So, yeah, not great news, but this is all too familiar, which is why I'm talking to you about it today. And here's where it comes from. Our perception of how we think life should be develops over time and is shaped by two primary factors: the standards we use to evaluate ourselves, which is what drives our expectations in life, plus the actual priorities that are driving our decisions and behavior already, which often conflict with the standards we're evaluating ourselves by, hence the tension. So we'll start with the standards that we use to evaluate ourselves. They come from everywhere: our family and upbringing, the culture we grow up in, our religious beliefs and encounters with other believers, social media, of course, our real life social circles, and dare I say, even celebrities we don't even know personally online. So they come from all over the place. The challenge is we rarely recognize our standards and expectations as interpretations. We experience them as reality. We assume everyone should see the situation the way we do because our standard feels so obvious to us. But obvious isn't the same as objective, it's just familiar. And that's why no two people will ever look at the same situation and arrive at the exact same conclusion. And this is where it gets tricky. When you aren't aware of your unique set of standards, because you've never consciously examined them, you spend your entire life measuring yourself against them, which often results in an ongoing conflict with the second factor, which is the real and highly individualistic priorities that are already driving your behavior. This is the other part most people miss because we weren't given the tools to examine them properly. You see, even if theoretically two people did inherit the same exact standards, they still won't interpret themselves the same way. Why? Because no two people on the planet prioritize the same things in the same order to the same degree of magnitude as another. Everyone is driven by different priorities. And consequently, we all have different motivations, different needs, and different sources of meaning. And those priorities are the real indicator of what we truly value as individuals. But there's often a disconnect between what people think they value and where they actually spend their time. And where you spend your time and money, and there's a couple other questions that lead to this, that's where the evidence lives for what you actually prioritize versus what you intend to. And this is where the friction festers in our life. And this is where the stress comes from. It's the root of the problem and why our brains are perceiving threats that aren't there. Because when we evaluate ourselves against inherited standards that don't align with what God defined, and we think we're prioritizing one thing, but our calendars reflect something else, we constantly feel like we're not measuring up, when the real issue is simply a misinterpretation of ourselves because we're measuring ourselves against the wrong criteria. And then we get stuck in that never ending cycle of self judgment. And that doesn't exactly set the stage for a healthy relationship with ourselves, let alone anyone else. And it's also just unnecessary. It's an unnecessary layer that we can absolutely rid ourselves of. And ridding yourself of it is what allows you to finally stop deflecting and obsessing over how to get other people to change, and instead shift your energy inward and getting control of yourself, which, like I keep saying, is the only thing you actually can control anyway. Trying to change other people is futile, and it's really not the best use of your energy. And it's precisely why you get so frustrated and emotionally charged when conflicts arise. Only God can change people, and even He requires us to be willing to allow Him to work within us. And this is where humility comes into the picture. In order to realign your standards with God's truth and your unique design, you have to take a step back and be willing to ask the question, what am I missing? And so the first step in doing that is examining where your standards come from. Did you consciously sign up for them? And do they in fact align with God's truth? Or have you just absorbed them over time because they were celebrated by your family and the culture that you live in? Seriously, take some time to examine this. And then the next step is identifying your priorities. So you can pull back the curtain on what's already shaping your perception of yourself and the world around you. Because until you understand your lens, you're going to continue reacting to the symptoms and you'll keep yourself in that constant state of stress. But when you've been in survival mode, you most likely can't see the forest through the trees, which is why you don't have a strong handle on this already. And that's exactly why I created the Core Priorities Snapshot, which you can find at everythingonpurpose.com/snapshot. And it's totally free and it's designed to help you uncover your true priorities, not someone else's, and not a list of things you should be doing to reach someone else's definition of success, because we just talked about where that path leads. This is where you stop that cycle. And it's why it's an interactive experience and not just another one size fits all guide. Because let's get real, no one can tell you who you are. No one can tell you how you're uniquely designed and wired and exactly what you need. Not me, not another personality assessment label that all you do is use to justify the behavior you're not proud of anyway. And not another guru who doesn't know you personally. Only God and your willingness to honestly examine the evidence He's already revealing through your life. That's how this is different. The experience gives you real-time personal feedback to start peeling back the layers you've likely never examined like this before. Because it's designed to help you understand the priorities already shaping how you interpret yourself and the world around you. And once you understand your lens, you can begin improving how you experience your life and everyone in it. Plus, the coolest thing about the Core Priority Snapshot is that it's literally the starting point for everything I offer. So, if working with me personally to eliminate the emotional triggers you just can't get around, you just can't shake, if that eventually becomes the right next step for you, the snapshot is exactly where we would begin. So, you might as well check it out now. Because before you can change anything, we need to understand what's actually driving it. So, head over to everythingonpurpose.com/snapshot. And yes, I said everything on purpose. Because here's the thing, once you're powered by purpose, you begin living more intentionally. And before long, everything you do will be on purpose in the best way. So that's my company's name. And soon it will be your new mantra. So if you're ready to stop being held hostage by your reactivity and you're ready for people to not have to do those mental gymnastics to make excuses for your behavior, and you want to take back control of the only thing you can control anyway, which is, of course, yourself, then seriously, go check it out at everythingonpurpose.com/snapshot. And by the way, if you're a current Substack subscriber, you already have access. So just use the link that's in the emails you get from me and log in to get started. If you aren't a subscriber yet, then go ahead and hit the subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening on. Each week, my goal is to give you fresh, new ways to identify and then remove the log from your eye, so you can finally begin seeing yourself, others, and God more clearly as He intended. And now here you are. You're armed with a super cool free tool. It's interactive, and you can start your journey at everythingonpurpose.com/snapshot. The link is in the show notes too, so check it out. Because that's where you can take a meaningful and practical step to getting out of survival mode. And it's where real lifelong transformation begins. Because remember, renewed minds require more than just good intentions. And the people you're around don't experience your intentions, they experience your behavior. So it's time to get it together, which I, of course, mean and say with love, because we all need to. We all need to get it together and control our own behavior.